Last Sabbath, we spoke about Jesus is the truth. He is the truth and he has given the truth. And now, this morning, my message is going to be based on freed from the devil's lies. And this is September 21, 2024. Freed from the devil's lies. And the devil's lies originated, and I have to go back and look at this again and read it. It originated in heaven when Lucifer rebelled against God. And I'll just read from verse 14 to verse 16 of Ezekiel chapter 28. Talking of Lucifer, you were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, which means to say he was perfect in his ways. He knew the truth. He knew agape love. He was perfect in his ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. This iniquity that was found in him went against God's agape love. And we'll see what he did. So this iniquity went against God's agape love. He introduced iniquity in the universe till iniquity was found in you. Verse 16, this iniquity represented by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In verse 16 of Ezekiel 28, by the abundance of your trading. What was he trading? His iniquity. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil law or principle. By the abundance of your trading iniquity, I have avoided that word iniquity there, you became what? This iniquity filled him with violence. He became filled with violence, which means to say his whole system that he introduced when he went against God's character of agape love was filled with nothing but violence. This is something that is foundational. We must grasp and understand. If not, we will get it wrong. So here, you became filled with violence within and you sinned. So sin and violence goes together. Very clear here. So when he sinned, he was filled with violence and he sinned. So sin and violence is of whom? Of Lucifer, of the devil, not of God. Sin and violence is not of God. Therefore, I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God. He was cast out from heaven as a profane thing, as a totally contaminated thing. From the mountain of God is the whole system of God. Then, at the latter part of verse 16, and I destroyed you. Wow. There it is. God destroyed him. Well, if God destroyed him, then how come he came down to earth? See how misunderstanding can happen? We think and he destroyed him. So in some way God killed him. No, that word destroy means, and go back to Hebrews chapter 2 verses 14 and 15. Inasmuch as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, Jesus Christ himself came in the same, that through death, through Jesus' own death, he destroyed him. Destroyed Satan. How? He destroyed him who had the power of death. Violence. Satan had the power of death. Death is not of God. Satan had the power of death. And how he was destroyed is when we will come to the realization. I'm going to read that verse and show you that once we come to understand this properly, that he has the power of death, then that destruction happens on him, which means to say he can no longer make us believe his lies. And the next passage I want to look at in this context is, so when Lucifer rebelled against God and he went against God's agape love, what was God's throne and God's character was based on what? God's throne room and God's character. When you say somebody sits on the throne, it means to say he sits on the authority and the power that he had. Well, God's throne is based on what? Again, nothing but God's agape love. That's God's throne. Now here in Psalm 94:20, we are told of the throne that is in opposition to God's throne of agape love. Shall the throne of iniquity, shall the throne of what? Iniquity. And who originated iniquity? Lucifer. So shall the throne of iniquity, which devises evil by law. Keep that in mind. The throne of iniquity has a system in it, has a law governing it also. Shall the throne of iniquity, which devises evil by law, have fellowship with you? Have any kind of a fellowship with God? No. So here, in this verse, we are told very clearly that there's a kingship. A throne represents a kingship. So in a way, Satan's throne, I'm reading it again, his throne, the throne of iniquity, which devises evil by law, have fellowship with you. So what is this law that is based on his system of violence? The throne of iniquity. When in the garden, God had told Adam and Eve, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, their whole mind got warped. They became in a way profane. And they looked at God in fear. Because we are told that when God went looking for them, they hid from God in fear. Now the lie that Satan said to Eve, he says, the day you eat, God said, the day you eat of it, you shall what? Surely die. The serpent turns around and Eve says, no. First lie he puts there on earth. In heaven, when iniquity started with him, there was lying involved with him. So the moment he said to Eve, you shall not surely die, when God had said you will surely die, he lied there, he became a liar. And what did he lie against again? Against God's character, against God's agape love. Now, and that's why I'm saying it's such a blessing to have experienced what we just experienced here this morning, because I'm going to read what Paul wrote in connection with Satan's lies and how Satan is trying to deceive us. And the deception, when he deceives us, is based on lies. So when we believe his lies, we are deceived. And what I'm going to read now is, unless the Christian world comes to understand what we just understood here this morning in Sabbath class, and each and every one have understood, if not, this is what happens. And this is Paul writing. And I'm just going to read a bit from the beginning before I go right on to the main passage. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and I'll read from verse 12. And Paul is talking about false apostles. So he starts, but what I do, I will also continue to do, meaning that he is not going to stop teaching and preaching what God has given him to do. That I may cut off the opportunity, by presenting the truth, he'll cut off the opportunity from those who desire an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in things of which they boast. So what he's saying here, that he will not stop preaching and teaching and living out God's agape love, and irrespective who desires, because the opposition who desires an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in all those things which they boast. So what do they boast about? They boast about the way they are understanding things, preaching and teaching things that has got nothing to do with God's character of agape love. Nothing. So here, what Paul said, for such, this is very powerful what he's saying, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And no wonder. Why? For Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. So what happens when we start believing his lies and we are deceived? Then what happens? We are following his law. And we've seen this. His law, the throne of iniquity which devises evil by law. Verse 15, therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. So unless we have, and this has not applied at any other stage in the history of the world, it applies directly for us living now, that we must understand this character of God message, this agape love character of God message. With that, I want us to go to Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9, and we're going to look at something here that we're going to tie up with Revelation. And what we just read there in Corinthians about false apostles and Satan himself transforming himself into an angel of light, we are now going to look at Isaiah chapter 9 verses 15 and 16. The elder and honorable, he is the head. The elder and the honorable, all the people that are involved with misrepresenting God's character, that are eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, these elders are honorable. Not in God's sight, not with the truth, they are honorable in their lives. And people are honoring them. Okay? The elder and the honorable, he is the head. The prophet who teaches lies, he is the tail. We'll have to look at this and pay very particular attention to this, okay? The prophet who teaches lies, he is the tail. For the leaders of this people, these honorable elders, for the leaders of this people, cause them to err. And those who are led by them are destroyed. Very clear that if we are not understanding God's character of agape love, we are not preaching and teaching that message, then we are Satan's agents. And we'll look at this. Go to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. And I'm going to read first. I'm going to read verses 7 to 9 of Revelation chapter 12. Verses 7 to 9. And war broke out in heaven. Remember we just read in Ezekiel chapter 28 about Lucifer as perfect in his way from the day he was created till iniquity was found in him. That's the war. And war broke out in heaven. What is this war? We think in terms of militaristic way? No. Don't think in any way in a militaristic way. It's got nothing to do with violence and war. There was no such thing. The word in the Greek is polemic. Polemos. And it means what? A debate between Lucifer presenting his law, his system against God's law of agape love that governed the universe. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. The discussion. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. Remember, as a profane thing, he was what? Cast out of from where? The mountain of God. So at the cross, once Jesus died on the cross and revealed the totality of God's agape love, he was cast out from heaven. Nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. For them. Which means to say, there was more than just the dragon himself that was cast out. So the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, and this portion, who deceives the whole world. Which means to say the whole world is governed and believes in Satan's system. Even the Christian world, who deceived the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. With that, I want now to look at verse 4. Remember the prophet that we read about in Ezekiel chapter 9, the tale of the false prophet. In verse 4, we read, his tail, this is Lucifer and his system, the dragon, his tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. His tail is what? We read about that in Ezekiel is what? Lies and deception and all the evil that comes from him. That tail, he also took, with that deception, with that lies, he took also 1/3 of the angels. So Satan ended up taking 1/3 of the angels with him and to believe his lies. And they were cast to the earth. Once again, I'll read verse 9. So the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceived the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So how are we to be set free from this lie of Satan? How are we to be set free so that we will no longer be deceived by him? For that, I just want us to look at Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16. In Exodus chapter 16, we are going to look at the issue of the manna. And I'm going to start with verse 14 of Exodus chapter 16. This is about the manna that fell in the wilderness for the children of Israel. And I'm not going to read the whole passage. I'm just going to go from verse 14. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance as fine as frost on the ground. That is the manna. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, this manna, they said to one another, what is it? They had no idea what is it. Now this is a reality that happened, but it is a type pointing to the true manna, Jesus Christ. Okay, so here they're looking at the type, the manna, and they are saying, what? What is this? What is it? in a way, they are, and you'll see this, how it applies to us and to the children of Israel at the first advent. What is it? What is this thing? For they did not know what it was. And I look at Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1 and verse 27. Mark chapter 1 and verse 27. Keep in mind what we just read there in the wilderness when they looked at the manna and what they said, okay? Then they were all amazed, so that they questioned one another among themselves, saying, now this time here, the manna there represented who? Jesus. But here now, the reality is present. This is no longer the physical manna. This is Jesus, the reality is here. Look what they said. Then they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, what is this? Can you see this? What is this? Who's this person? What kind of a person is this? Why? Because everything Jesus was teaching was, what is this? Like we turn around, hey, you guys are crazy in this church. You're all, what is this? You're teaching stuff and promoting stuff. What is this? You see what I'm saying? Instead of the truth, which is Jesus himself, this is what we end up doing. This is exactly what we end up doing. When we reject Jesus Christ's revelation of the truth and we believe in the devil's lies, in reality, this is what we are doing what the children of Israel did in the wilderness with the manna. What is this? We turn around and say, what is this? Or, hey, what kind of rubbish is all of this? The Bible doesn't teach what you are preaching and teaching. It's all rubbish. What is this? This is exactly the same principle applies. Until we are free from all the lies that Satan wants us to believe, we cannot give the truth for the end time. Before Jesus comes, there's a truth that is to be given to the world. And that truth is based on nobody else but the person of Jesus Christ. In Exodus 16 and verse 22, I'll read that. In verse 22, and so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, twice as much manna. When they picked twice as much manna on the 6th day, and we've studied this, we've gone through this in our studies here. What does the 6th day represent for us living now? The 6,000 years, the end of the 6,000 years. So here we are living at the end of the 6,000 years. On every 5 days, they collected manna once, only once. But on the 6th day, they collected manna, double portion, twice. Which means to say, we, living at this stage in the history of the world, are doing what? We are presenting a double portion of Jesus that was never represented and given before. This is what we are doing. We are giving the double portion of Jesus Christ to the world. And for that we are going to look at John chapter 6. John chapter 6. And we start with verse 26 of John chapter 6, in the context of everything we have looked at so far. Jesus answered them, the people that were questioning him, and I'll read verse 25. And when they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Wanting to follow Jesus. And look at what Jesus turns around and says to them. And prayerfully, I hope we don't do this mistake. Fortunately for us in this church, we are not. The Sabbath class has confirmed for us that God is guiding us. Jesus answered and said to them, to these people that were coming and following and wanting to follow Jesus, hey, to Jesus, when did you come here? So they came looking for Jesus. And look at what Jesus turned around and says to them. Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me, not because you saw the signs, not because of all the signs that I gave to prove to you and show you the truth about God, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you. Nobody else can give you this. Nobody. You can read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation and understand it the wrong way, you haven't got it. Only Jesus Christ can give us the true understanding of the Holy Scriptures. Because God the Father has set His seal on Him. God the Father set the seal on the person of Jesus Christ because the Son only can give you the truth. Why? Because He is the truth. Then they said to Him, what shall we do that we may work the works of God? Can you imagine? Now they want to do the works of God. But look at what Jesus says. Pay attention, dear ones. Jesus answered and said to them, this is the work of God. You can do all the works you want. But what Jesus is saying, this is the works of God. That you believe in Him whom He sent. So powerful that you and I believe on Him. That believe in Him whom God the Father sent. Why? Because He's the only one that can cleanse our minds of all the lies we have believed. And that whole issue of the cleansing of the temple at the beginning of the ministry and the end of the ministry involves this. Therefore they said to Him, what sign will He perform then that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Then Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven. Moses did not give you the bread from heaven. But my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is He who comes down from heaven and gives light to the world. And I want to skip all of that now and go to verse 41. The Jews then complained about Him because He said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. They didn't like that. When Jesus said, I'm the bread that came down from heaven, Moses did not give you the true bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread, and I am the true bread. And they said, but the Jews then complained about Him because He said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. And they said, is not this Jesus, son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that He said, I have come down from heaven? Jesus therefore answered and said to them, do not murmur among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophet, and they shall all, for the end time, before the second advent of Jesus Christ, and they shall all be taught by God. Therefore, everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except he who is from God, he has seen the Father. Verse 53. Then Jesus said to them, verse 52, the Jews therefore quarreled among themselves, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Why? Because in verse 48, Jesus said, I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. Whoa! If you eat of this bread, what will happen? You will not die. You know what that means? That those of us living before the second advent of Jesus Christ, if we feed on Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone, we are no longer governed by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We are feeding on the double portion of manna. What will happen? We will not die. The final generation that will be alive before the second advent of Jesus Christ will be what? Caught up. They'll be translated. They will not die. That's why, dear ones, this message is for the end time. No other time. No other time in the history of the world. This is the time before the second advent of Jesus Christ. This message is to be given that we eat Jesus' flesh and drink his blood. I am the living bread, verse 51, which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. They will not die. The final generation people, dear ones, and we are living in that final generation. And what has happened in the Sabbath class this morning is heavenly anointed. This is our understanding, and then we must live it out. This is the message, that we will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. Verse 55, for my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. What Jesus is saying, because of time now, what Jesus is saying, that we must eat his flesh and drink his blood. The depth of the meaning of what Jesus is stating there is that don't waste your time feeding and eating whatever all these preachers and teachers of the world are giving. And here Pastor Aaron so beautifully brought out what happens in Hindu temples. That same system from the Garden of Eden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that same system permeated Hindu temples, the Jewish temples. It was all just oriented in a way to defame God's character. So when you and I, through the double portion of manna, which is Jesus Christ, eat of that bread and drink of his blood and nothing else, then Romans chapter 16 verse 20 kicks in. Romans chapter 16 verse 20. And the God of peace, I'm sorry, where is this? Romans, let me see. And the God of peace, yes, and the God of peace, pay particular attention to this, and the God of what? Peace. The God of non-violence, the God of agape love, the God of peace will crush Satan under your feet. How is Satan crushed under our feet? When we no longer will believe his lies, when we are only feeding, eating and drinking the flesh of body and blood of Jesus Christ, which means to say we are just feeding on him and him alone, nobody else, Satan's head is crushed under our feet. Which means to say we are no longer believing his lies, we have accepted the truth from the person who is the truth, Jesus Christ.